So, who is fit to worship God? In the encounter with the woman at the well in John chapter 4, which we're reading today, because Jesus knows this woman and knows that she's had 5 husbands, or at least 5 lovers who have acted like her husband, and because she senses that his words carry more weight in the depths than they do on the surface, the woman said to him, "Sir, I can see you are a prophet. Our ancestors worshipped on this mountain, but you people say that the place to worship is in Jerusalem." She's a Samaritan from the northern part of Israel. She's not fully a member of the cult that exists and is centered in Jerusalem during Jesus' time at the temple, which is actually the second temple. We read in First Kings about how Solomon is building the first temple, which the Babylonians destroy several hundred years later, and then the temple is rebuilt. And it's the second temple that stands in Jerusalem at David's time. And she is saying to him, your people, the Jews, say that we can only worship at the temple in Jerusalem. There is only one fit way to worship God. And he replies to her, Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, the hour is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem. There will not be a Samaritan center of worship nor a Jewish center of worship. You people worship what you do not understand. We worship what we understand, because salvation is from the Jews." In other words, Jesus is the culmination of the fullest revelation of God, which begins with Father Abraham 2,000 years or so BC. The fullness of God's revelation comes through the Jews into the church. Salvation is from the Old Testament into the New. It is from the Jews. But this proper way to worship is not just limited to the specific rules and regulations regarding the Mosaic law or the temple in Jerusalem. For Jesus goes on to explain to her, "But the hour is coming and is now here when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth." Remember, we read yesterday about baptism by water and by spirit. And indeed, the Father seeks such people to worship him. A worship and a service of God which is not merely limited to a ritualistic exterior expression. A worship and a service of God which has to do with spirit and truth. Spirit really, I think, meaning, which is why it's capitalized in this translation, the Holy Spirit, the presence of God, and his truth. Again, truth is central to the gospel according to John, which is why it's so important that we follow the truth, whether it's the truth of science or the truth that we learn about history, in order to serve God. So Jesus is saying to her, true worship is not just about the exteriors or about what has come to be accepted in this day. God is spirit, he continues, and those who worship him must worship in spirit and in truth. He then tells her that he's the Messiah. She goes into town to tell everybody that she's met the Messiah. The disciples come back surprised he's talking to a woman, which would not have happened in those days. They're urging him to get something to eat. He says, "I have food to eat of which you do not know." The disciples said to one another, "Could someone have brought him something to eat?" Jesus said to them, "My food is to do the will of the one who sent me and to finish his work." And then he goes on to talk about the harvest and the reapers. And he's talking about profound things. But the disciples, which is usually how they act, are dunderheads. They take what he's saying literally at first. He's got food that we don't know of. Did somebody bring him a snack? Did that woman at the well have a sandwich? Did she offer him a picnic? He's speaking at a deeper level. Now I'm going to tie this in to what happens in the book of Acts today. In Acts, we have John and Peter healing the lame man who is at the temple. Now, there's a lot to be said about this, but let me just remind you of some things that you might know and some things that you probably don't. Back in Leviticus in the Old Testament, we are told about people who can approach the Lord, meaning either worshipers or Jewish priests. No man who has any defect may approach. No man who is blind, lame, disfigured, or deformed. No man who has a broken hand or foot, who is a hunchback or dwarf, etc., etc. The ritualistic Mosaic law, which prohibited certain people from approaching God and which also regulated the lives of people, these were the technical laws that the Pharisees followed because they believed more in the letter of the law than the spirit of the law. These are the things that the Pharisees and the religious people, the super Jews, you might say, in Jesus' day relied upon. And so one of the rules going all the way back to Leviticus, which comes at the time of Moses, is lame people, people who are disfigured through no fault of their own, may not approach God, because the idea is you must only approach God in fullness and holiness. But of course, we know as Christians that we're all lame, we're all broken, we're all hunchbacks, we're all dwarfs, spiritually speaking. I don't want you guys to think like the disciples. Is Mr. O'Brien a hunchback and we've never seen him from behind? What's he talking about? I'm talking on a spiritual level, symbolically, metaphorically. We're all broken. We're all in need of healing. Now, remember that Jesus, before Peter and John ever heal in front of the temple, Jesus does it. First of all, before we go to that, we read here in Jeremiah that after the exile, we're reading about the effects of the exile in Lamentations, God says through Jeremiah, "Behold, I will bring them from the land of the north and gather them from the farthest part of the earth, including the blind and the lame, expectant mothers and women in labor, etc." God promises to bring even those who are crippled and disfigured. Oh, people don't say crippled anymore. We used to say the word crippled when I was young. You can't say crippled anymore. But people who are disfigured, not only physically, but spiritually, are going to be drawn back to God's place, according to God's prophecy in Jeremiah. Now, also elsewhere in the New Testament, Jesus says, if you are to have a feast, don't just invite your rich friends who could pay you back for inviting them to a feast. Invite the lame, invite those who are poor, invite those who can't do anything to pay you back. Give your generosity, not with the hopes of a transaction, of getting something in return. Give even to those who are unable to return. So that even Jesus sort of, in a way, is symbolically prophesying, even the lame and the blind and those who are broken need to be brought into the feast. So that, as I was saying, when Jesus does the healing, and here we have Matthew 21, then Jesus entered the temple court and drove out all those who were buying and selling there. We read John's version of this, I believe, yesterday or the day before. He overturned the tables of the money changers, etc., etc. My house will be a house of prayer. You are making it a den of thieves or a den of robbers. The blind and the lame, according to Matthew, came to him at the temple, and he healed them at the temple. Now, they're not supposed to go all the way into the temple. This would have been one of the outer courts of the temple, because the Jewish law prohibited the blind and the lame from coming all the way into the temple. But the chief priests and scribes were indignant when they saw the wonders he performed. They're indignant that people are worshiping him, and they're indignant that Jesus is healing these people in the temple, where according to the Pharisees, they don't even belong, at least not fully. So this then puts into context what's happening with Peter and John. When Peter and John heal the lame man who's at the gate of the temple, this becomes an issue. He comes into the temple with them once he's no longer lame because he's no longer prohibited. In other words, symbolically speaking, we're able more fully to worship God in spirit and in truth because God brings us his spirit, and his spirit heals us and begins to make us whole. The worship of God, the service of God, and the wholeness and healing in our hearts go together, in spite of what the scribes and Pharisees say, because here in the next few days, we'll read about the reaction to the healing of Peter and John. They heal, they preach about Jesus, and the scribes and Pharisees go ballistic. They don't like the fact that the Spirit is present and that God is being worshiped in spirit and truth, and that good deeds are being done outside of their little box that they want to put God in. Now I'm getting looks to me like maybe there's the video is jumpy, so I'm going to wrap it up. A lot of people don't like Pope Francis because he said that the church is a hospital for those who need healing. It's not a home for those who are already perfect, but that's true. We need the healing. We need what Jesus brought to the woman at the well, whose life was broken internally. We need what the lame need when Jesus heals them, when Peter and John heal them. We are all broken. And the church, the spirit and the truth that it conveys to us, can be our hospital and our place of healing beyond just worshiping in the temple, worshiping in our own lives, and worshiping in how we live and what we do in spirit and in truth.